Today we are going to be evaluating these beef carcasses. We're going to be evaluating them on their quality as well as their yield characteristics. So you can see here that there are plenty of differences between these carcasses. They do range in a weight of anywhere from 700 to 900 pounds. All of these carcasses have been ribbed between the 12th and 13th rib. Animals are very much like humans, where they are left-handed or right-handed. So the majority of all animals are actually left-handed. So usually on their left side, it is going to be a higher quality and heavier muscle side, since that is their dominant side. So when we're going to actually rib these carcasses to determine where that 12th and 13th rib is located, we're actually going to count our lumbar vertebrae. So I'm going to find our first lumbar vertebrae, count 7.5 vertebrae down, and that's where I will rib these carcasses, because at that point is at the 12th and 13th rib interface. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5, and that will get us right between the 12th and 13th rib. First thing that we're going to look at when we're evaluating our yield factors of these beef carcasses is we're going to evaluate the back fat thickness. So we measure the back fat thickness by looking at the external fat opposite this ribeye, about 3/4 of the distance, the length of the longissimus dorsi. So how we determine where we're going to take our back fat measurement is we are going to find the chine bone right here. So where our chine bone is, we're going to go 3/4 of the distance up the length of that longissimus dorsi. I'm going to take my back fat probe. I'm going to cut that ribeye in half, and then I'm going to cut that ribeye in half again, and that is going to give me the 3/4 of the distance measurement that I'm going to take to measure my preliminary yield grade. So here on my back fat probe, I'm going to be using the preliminary yield grade portion of the probe to take my measurement. So at my 3/4 of the distance, I'm going to place my probe down, and it looks like we measured that PYG at a 3.2. So 3.2 is my preliminary yield grade of this carcass. So without taking any other measurements, we know just with the amount of external fat that this carcass possesses, that this carcass is already starting out at a yield grade 3. So we know that there's other factors that we're going to evaluate, including ribeye area, hot carcass weight, and KPH, but right now, the preliminary yield grade of this carcass is going to be a 3.2. So when we're making adjustments as far as back fat measurement, so we talked about not always when you measure the back fat here in this location at that 12th and 13th rib, does that fat measurement match the rest of the carcass? So if we were to be looking at this carcass, we measure a 3.2, we're going to look down the rib and along what we call the lower rib. So the lower rib is going to be this region right here, where I can see that it's carrying a little bit of extra fat. I'm going to be looking for fat up my loin, and then also the fat over the tail head, over the rounds, how much udder fat this carcass possesses, and also fat over that inside portion of the round. So we can see by looking up over the round, over the tail head, the loin, and the lower rib, that this carcass is carrying a little bit more fat than what our measurement at our PYG initially measure. So if I was to measure here at a 3.2, by looking at all the external fat on the outside of the carcass, I would probably bring this adjusted preliminary yield grade from a 3.2 up to a 3.3 or even a 3.4. So I know that it's lower yielding because of excess fat. So the next factor we're going to evaluate is our meat factor. So we're going to evaluate that meat factor using our ribeye dot grid. First thing we want to look at, we're actually going to look at this ribeye. We are going to look or the longissimus dorsi muscle. And the longissimus dorsi muscle, again, is that bunny rabbit shape. A lot of muscles up in here, so it could be a little bit confusing. But if we do find that bunny rabbit shape, we're going to be able to find the actual longissimus dorsi muscle. So put your imagination together and really look to where our bunny rabbit is located. So here is the ear of our bunny rabbit, and it falls around to the head. Here we have a front foot, and then the rest of his body right here. So that inner circle where that bunny rabbit area is located is actually the longissimus dorsi. So we don't want to include this outer muscle right here. This is our spinalis dorsi, or any of our intercostal muscles present up here. We just want to measure the longissimus dorsi or that bunny rabbit shape. So we're going to measure our ribeye by using our ribeye dot grid. So we're going to be looking at our house measurement. So we always want to keep the attic of the house at the top of the ribeye. We want to keep the basement of the house at the bottom of the ribeye. And we always want to keep the skinny portion of this ribeye dot grid along the inside next to the rib. So again, the inner square is going to be 80 dots or 8 square inches. Top triangle is going to be 20 dots or 2 square inches, and this bottom triangle is going to be 10 dots or 1 square inch. So adding all of these together, that equals our ribeye base, which is 11 square inches. So with our ribeye dot grid, the placement of this ribeye dot grid on this ribeye is very, very important. So when I'm placing my ribeye dot grid, I want my inner box going towards this rib, and I want the adduct of my dot grid up towards the top of the ribeye, and I want the kind of basement portion down here towards the rabbit head. So I'm actually going to place this ribeye dot grid, and I'm going to place this dark line on this inner portion of this ribeye. So I know that my inner house, our main 11 square inches, is going to be 110 dots. But we can see here, looking at this area of this ribeye, we actually see that we have this one dot right here that is not touching this ribeye, and also this dot right here that is also not touching the ribeye. So I'm going to start my counting at 110 box, but then I'm going to subtract 110, 109, 108. So now I'm going to start my counting in 108 boxes, or 108 dots. So we go 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, follow it all the way around, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 51, so that's 151 dots. So this will be a 15.1 inch ribeye. So this is a very, very large ribeye for this carcass. So far we have a preliminary yield grade of a 3.2 and a 15.1 inch ribeye. So next thing we're going to evaluate is our kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. So the first thing we need to look at when we're determining our overall kidney, pelvic, and heart fat is our carcass weight. So to determine carcass weight, all we have to do is look at the tag, and I see on this tag, this carcass weighs 805 pounds. So that kind of gives me a premise on how much kidney, pelvic, and heart fat these two sides are going to possess. So we have our left side and our right side. So in beef cattle, they put on their kidney, pelvic, and heart fat in different ways depending on the side of their carcass. So over here on this side, I can actually put my arm behind, up underneath this kidney knob. So this is the left side, and we call this the loose side. is. So this fat is very, very loose. I can put my hand up underneath this loose side versus the right side we consider the tight side. So this fat is really kind of built up within this body cavity. It's very, very tight up against that tenderloin. I can't get my hand underneath it, and it kind of has this big ball of fat here. So when I'm looking at the amount of kph, I'm going to be looking at how much pelvic fat we have in this region. We have the fat here in this kidney knob. So we can see we have all this fat in this kidney knob. Then we have some heart fat down here as well. So looking at this side and looking at this side, we can see there's a little bit of fat here. So just as an expert guess, with an 805-pound carcass, this carcass would yield about 2% kph. So again, 80% of cattle in the United States have a 2% kph. So this is actually a really great carcass to look at, because according with the carcass weight, this is what 2% kph looks like. So any more than this amount of fat is going to be a 2.5 or 3% kph, and then anything less than this amount of fat, according to the weight, would be a 1.5 or a 1% kph. So after looking at our preliminary yield grade, our ribeye area, hot carcass weight, kph, go ahead and calculate your overall final yield grade. With your final yield grade, then we're going to move on to quality grade. When we are going to evaluate quality grading, we are going to evaluate not only maturity, but also marbling. So when we're looking at our marbling score, we're going to use our USDA marbling card. So I always like to start with my lowest card possible. So we can see here, this is our slight 0 card, and this slight 0, you can definitely see that this ribeye is going to beat this card. It is much better, has a much greater amount of marbling. So then we're going to go to the next card, and which is our small 0. So we can still see that in comparison to this ribeye, this small 0 card has a lot less marbling than our actual ribeye. So then next, I'm going to go to our next higher card, which is our modest 0. And we can see we're actually starting to get a little bit closer. We do have a little bit more marbling than what this card shows. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my next card. This ribeye actually has a lot of very finely dispersed marbling, and so it's actually going to be very, very close to this card. So when I'm actually going to evaluate this, I believe that this quality grade is going to be in the moderate grade. So this would be a high choice. So when I'm looking at my marbling and I see my moderate 0, I know that this card is very, very close to moderate 0, because when we compare our slab 0, the slab 0 just has way more marbling than this card. So when comparing the two, I have moderate 0 here, and I have a moderate 100, which is my slab 0 card. I actually kind of find this ribeye to fit right in the middle. So I'm just going to use kind of a guess of a 10-point scale in between these two cards. So if this would be 0, this would be 100. I would probably give this overall marbling score a moderate 50. There's a lot of this really fine marbling up here in the top. There's some kind of bigger marbling here as well, but we've got some uniform marbling throughout this ribeye. When we're evaluating thoracic ossification, we're going to be looking at these thoracic buttons. So here we have these thoracic buttons, and we're going to actually look at the top 3 buttons. So we have 1, 2, 3, and we can see within these top 3 buttons that they are perfectly white, and there is 0 ossification within those buttons. So already with those 0 ossification, we know that this carcass is going to be a maturity. So when we're going to determine overall maturity, we're also going to evaluate our lumbar and sacral ossification to come up with overall maturity. So when we're going to be looking at overall maturity, we're also going to evaluate the lumbar region. So we can see there is a little bit of cartilage at the end of each one of these lumbar vertebrae. Well, there's a really good sign already that there is zero ossification that we find at this outer tip of this lumbar vertebra. It's still all cartilage. So we know from this skeletal structure that this is a very low A maturity. So I'm going to probably give this an overall A20 or A30 as far as its skeletal maturity. So I'm going to balance our skeletal maturity with our lean maturity. This lean maturity is very bright, cherry red colored lean. It's very, very youthful. I'm probably going to balance this out. I'd probably call it about A60 as far as its really youthful cherry red color. And so we would balance our color maturity score if we have A60 with our skeletal maturity score, which would be A20, and so we would meet in the middle, and so that would end up being overall A40. Go ahead and kind of determine what your marbling score of these ribeyes would be. Not only are you going to come up with if it's modest, small, slight, but I want you to come up with its overall marbling score. So I want you to give a 0 to 100 within each marbling score. Once we have our maturity score and our marbling score, we're going to use our quality chart to come up with our overall quality grade. So since this carcass I called a moderate 50, A maturity, its final quality grade would be a high choice. So this carcass actually qualifies for a top choice box beef program. Once you calculate the yield grade, you determine that this carcass is top choice. So looking at the sex determination of these cattle, it's going to be really easy to determine that this is a heifer by looking at that udder fat. You can actually see where the teats were removed on the slaughter floor. We're going to be looking up there, up in the semimembranosus muscle. It is a really long kind of kidney bean shape, and we just have that huge pile of udder fat. So that udder fat is really, really smooth. It's going to be indicative of a heifer carcass, especially when you see those two teat holes present within that udder. So I hope that this was a great tutorial on beef grading. I will take great pictures and video of all carcasses so that you can go ahead and make your calculations.